Your stomach makes a gurgling noise as the taste of bile begins to mix with blood in your mouth. Your innards burn with every breath you take, the stabbing feeling of your broken rib floating around inside you as your trembling hands are becoming so moist you can barely hold your spear. Purplish blood pours from the massive gouge you made in the lizard man's chest as he heaves his great sword over his head in the pale moonlight. The fetid smell of the swamp gas fills your nose. Your blurry eyes dart to the left, informing you the burning, itching feeling in your forearm has come from a dozen mosquitoes who are growing fat off your blood. You barely manage to get your spear up in time to parry back the lizard man's blow. The wooden shaft of your spear makes a loud cracking sound under the weight of his blow. Several of the splinters impale themselves into your right hand. The lizard man licks the air as you circle left, feint right, then thrust the broken spear forward, driving the flint tip deep into his throat. His sword falls from his clawed hand, striking you hilt first in the face. The inadvertent blow has loosened your teeth, leaving you with a numb feeling in your mouth. But your broken spear was true, and the beast now lies upon the tall reeds of the bog, limp, dead, and covered in his own slick purplish blood. Now, this is something I spent about 8 minutes writing to give a quick detail of how combat can be. And a mistake I see in fantasy games, particularly in Dungeons & Dragons, time and time again, is combat degenerates into an extremely boring, I hit, I miss, AC 15, 5 points of damage, and it continues to repeat over and over again. The hobgoblin misses you. The kobold misses you. The kobold misses you again. The kobold does 4 damage to you. This is not what combat should sound like. Now, what I put together there was very quick, very simplistic writing, but what it did is engaged all 5 of the senses, and it did this in a fashion to explain how many things are going on in combat, what you're seeing and feeling, and how the pain of combat affects your body, the broken bones, the taste of blood, the other things that are happening around you, dim lighting, and how menacing it can be to have an opponent above you that is trying to kill you. And perhaps his motivation for killing you is to take what you have, to enslave you, to rape you, or to eat you. These are bad, bad things. They're terrible, and combat is a terrible thing. People become horrendously shell-shocked and suffer from many, many mental illnesses from going on tours of active duty, and the characters in the Dungeons & Dragons game would suffer all the more so for fighting creatures that are alien and horrendous and fighting them over and over again. And that impact should weigh on your characters. There should be a degree of tremendous danger both to your body and to your mind when you're fighting against things that literally want to eat you, and that is their motivation. Now, when you get into that degree and level of play, you can really engage the horror and violence that is combat, and it makes your players respect the monsters and not want to as quickly go into I swing my sword. They are much more quick to learn other languages, and it makes that skill important because diplomacy becomes very important in real world situations where you don't want someone to slit your throat or break your skull open with a club. And these are very real possibilities, but taking 5 hit points of damage really isn't a big concern. Having your ear ripped off or your teeth knocked out or something trying to eat you makes it all so much realer and really drives home how ugly and despicable violence can be, and the dread and the tension and the terror of the combat. You'll find your players paying more attention, and particularly implementing this sort of highly descriptive combat when you have a shorter combat. This might not lend itself as well to 30 turns of combat, but you have the monster, you're going at it tooth and nail, toe to toe, and really giving them the gory, vivid details of how it sounds to have acid burning on their arm, or the smell of their companion whose flesh has been roasted on fire and is mixing in with the smell of his burning wine and clothing, and these scents you're catching on your nose as you're trying to drive your morning star deep into the hobgoblin's chest. It drives home a much greater detail of urgency and need here. Another thing you can implement here are critical hit tables where really bad things happen. It gives the players much less desire to want to simply beat up on smaller foes. The larger number of foes you have, the more dice you have, the more ability you have to really injure someone. Much like a real life situation, it doesn't take much to kill anyone. And an unwise player who goes and provokes situations over and over again in a very violent fashion can find themselves on the wrong end of that. Another thing I'd like to get across is the after effect of combat. You have a broken shoulder, your arm is dislocated, you have torn muscles, you have tooth missing, or you're covered in blood to a gory factor. Now, in my games, the prestidigitation spell has become extremely valued by players because you are covered in dust and dirt and grime and the stench and smell of the monsters that have been pawing at you, and your clothing are ripped up and you're bleeding. So the prestidigitation spell and the mending spell come in tremendous value when you take into the realistic application of what really is going on in combat and what really is happening. A player playing a beguiler in my game and they get an extra spell of like first level, I think when they're 4th level or 5th level, to add to their spell list. He went back for the 0th level spell prestidigitation. I was so glad to have it on his spell list because that's not a beguiler spell, and he uses the spell continuously to clean himself up, because you come in looking disgusting like that back into town, you are in no way opulent, and as often adventurers want to be opulent, to have that high fantasy appeal. Now at the same time, all these bad things are happening to you. Well, what's the opposite side of that? Healing magic, and you really push and put healing magic over. It gives the cleric their shine and makes them really stand out, and all the other players should really sell for the cleric. What he's doing isn't first aid. He is, with the force of power of his god, putting your body back together, reattaching fingers, closing up massive gouges in your chest, putting teeth back in you, getting the eye that's been knocked out to go back permanently into place, reattaching your ear and healing it, and the power of his god courses through you, and it's a tremendous feeling. And with each god, depending on what their portfolio is like, I go through and describe, well, it's a different one, and I work with the players to come up with it. Does it feel like a cortisone injection in you? Does it feel like a feeling of ecstasy surging through your body? Does it feel bad, as if something is wrong or malignant about what is happening to you, almost necrotic in the way that it's affecting your body and your immune system? And you can go through with every god and put a slight different spin on how the healing magic actually affects the players. Another thing that people often overlook, how important and powerful it is. And if any of us really had someone work that sort of healing magic upon us, we would probably be in utter awe of that person and go and say prayers to their gods. So this is a video to really get over how combat can be when you deal with the effects of having to vomit up blood from the internal organs that have just been damaged by the shot from the mace, or you go into what it sounds like to have a warhammer crushed against your shoulder by a massive ogre, the sound of your companions being sliced to pieces by daggers, or the feeling of warmth of your own blood pooling up under your armor, and the sound of crunching broken bones of both yourself and your adversaries, and the horrible things that you also have to do to maintain control, to maintain dominance, and to perhaps get off with just a little bit of treasure. Another trick I use is when characters have done very much damage, say an NPC has a few hit points left and they've gone well over that, or they've just rolled a big crit, and that NPC, that monster, is going to die. I turn narrative control fully over to the player, and I put him on the spot and make him describe, or her describe, what he or she has done to this monster or NPC. And they love and relish this control, and I found that that's just a great go-to really gets the player so immersed in what they're doing. And they'll describe puncturing the kidneys or slicing the spine, cutting forward, and doing sorts of horrible things. I get into very, very gory, vivid descriptions of cutting open stomachs and seeing the fat come out in the acidic contents of the stomach, or puncturing intestines and having to smell the smell of fecal matter, monsters soiling themselves several rounds after the combat while the adventurers are over there searching them for items, and of course also dealing with the monsters as you've killed one, and maybe another minute or so dealing with the rest of them, having to go over their bodies and just looking at the carnage after everything is done, the blood on both them and the surrounding landscape, and just the true horrible picture that paints. And what I find is we will go game sessions, and our game sessions are long, usually at least 8 hours. We will go game sessions without combat because the players are tentative to handle it that way. They learn languages and speak to the goblins and speak to the kobolds and speak to the hobgoblins because they are not as interested as just pushing it to combat, as their characters are worn down by that. And it creates a lot of interesting opportunities and possibilities when the players show respect to a tribe of hobgoblins and begin to develop tense and weary relationships with them, to develop new angles and arcs for a story, as opposed to just a standard slaughter, take treasure. Because if the slaughter is really described and explained and the danger is put there, it puts a whole new spin on the game.